Right, welcome to everyone to this webinar on assessing product circularity in practice. I'm just going to do a brief introduction before I pass across to my colleague, Dr. Lilian Sanchez Moreno. And the webinar is being recorded, and we will redistribute the link for you and for any of your colleagues. So this particular webinar has focused on some depth research we undertook on product circularity in industry, and Lillian will give you or provide the details of our approach and findings on this. And essentially, as many of you will be aware, there is a significant amount of work going on at covering circular economy. I was just at the World Circular Economy Forum last week, where there was 1,500 people there physically and 88,000 people online. This was then followed by a Belgian presidency event where there was about 1,000 people there, multiple online. We're also just about to see the launch of the first 3 circular economy standards within ISO and the start of International Standards Organization, and the start of the European circular economy standardization activity. There is also vertical activity starting in that area in furniture and textiles and construction. So there's a lot of activity going on. What we found through our research within the Orienting project was most of the activity, whether it be at standardization or in organizations, is more at an organizational or a business unit or process level, much less activity going on at a product level. At a product level, we've had sort of eco-design exist since the 1990s, or design for environment, environmentally conscious design, many terms for that, but essentially the same topic, in relation to integrating environmental issues into product development and design. But what we're also seeing now in parallel at a product level is the emergence of circular design, and even in some quarters, regenerative design, which we're looking at separately. However, one of the issues perhaps within circular design is that inevitably, if we're developing products, we've got a variety of environmental impacts. So there's this sort of, in a sense, tension between circular design developing and a more holistic eco-design approach. So I'll set that as the scene, and now I'll pass across to my colleague, Lillian.
Thank you, Martin. Before we start presenting the findings from the 21 in-depth interviews, I will begin by contextualizing how the research that we're presenting today was framed and scoped. So first of all, a brief background to Orienting. Orienting is a 3-year project that was recently completed in April 2024, and it was formed by the following 17 academic partners. Now, the overall aim, and perhaps next slide, please. The overall aim of Orienting was to develop an operational life cycle methodology for products and services to offer a practical approach that considers the environmental, the social, the economic impacts in an integrated way, as well as material circularity and criticality. This was to facilitate decision-making towards the circular economy. So as mentioned in the introduction, currently there are no internationally agreed definitions for the concept of circular economy, even though standardizations are working towards this. And this is evidenced by the following non-exhaustive list of circular economy and circularity definitions, which show the variations and nuances of meaning and understanding of the circular economy. So this represents a serious challenge to policymakers, to business and researchers working on this topic. And this is also highlighted within the findings that we will present today. If we go to the next slide, please. Yes, go. Sorry. Next slide.
Yeah, sorry, just a quick technical question, Lily. Are you moving the slide, or is it actually
no. I think
it's on a, oh, okay,
timed somehow.
it's somehow an animation has crept
Yeah.
in.
Okay. Yeah.
So, sorry, yes,
Yeah. No problem.
continue.
Yes. So, um, yeah. So, aligned to this, there is a growing interest in the measurement of circular economy at various levels. So this is across product organizations and also at a regional level. However, while there currently exists a plethora of product circularity metrics, indicators, and tools, as shown within this table, the focus remains at an organizational level rather than at the product level. So within orienting, over 100 academic papers related to circularity indicators and metrics were assessed, but the actual industry usage of these were not identified. Therefore, within the methodology work package of orienting, the Centre for Sustainable Design set out to investigate the practical considerations regarding the implementation and also the quantitative assessment of product-related circularity strategies across a diversity of sectors. And this is where the 21 in-depth interviews were conducted. So if we go to the next slide, please. So with this in mind, we conducted 21 in-depth interviews that focused solely on the design and development level. The companies were selected based on previous knowledge of company activities that were related to product circularity issues and desktop research. So the 21 companies indicated that they had a core circular economy business strategy or the intention to adopt a circular economy strategy. Next slide, please. So why design and development? The interviews focused on this phase because more than 80% of the environmental impacts from the product are determined during the design stage, and therefore conducting an LCSA that it includes an assessment of product circularity within this phase is where it could have the most impact in supporting decisions towards the circular economy. So yeah, that's fine. In terms of the methodology, interviews. This is a learning approach and allow for the definition of means to the questionnaire is divided into two topics. So first, we started with a series of questions that related to the interview's level of decision making related to product circularity. And this was followed by more product circularity specific questions to probe into more detailed elements related to the measurements, metrics, indicators, and the use of eco-design. As for interview strategy, next slide. For the large companies, we initially interviewed corporate sustainability directors to provide an overview of the product circularity issues across the various business units. And then for startups and SMEs, we focused on interviewing the founders or managing directors. In terms of the interview sample, this table shows a breakdown of the industry sectors that were interviewed, as well as product categorization, company size, and geographic location. Next slide. We also developed a circularity awareness level descriptor. So we assigned awareness levels to individual participants and at the company level. And was developed based on the Circular model, awareness that range from 0 to basic, intermediate, and advanced, as well as the WCSD's 2008 report titled analysis. Now, for this, really just a pattern to mention that we not include zero level as the company that they were on the as a result of
Sorry, Lillian, your sound is perhaps sounding a bit odd. So maybe you want to take we both take our uh,
yeah,
cameras off at the, see
sure.
if that makes a difference. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, so as a result of assigning the awareness levels to each participants, the needs and requirements related to the implementation of product circularity strategies and their measurement were identified per level. Next slide, please. Yeah. With regards to the data analysis from the 21 interviews, this was conducted using thematic coding, which consisted of categorizing and assigning different values to the key themes and topics that emerged from each interview. So based on the themes that emerged during the interviews, the findings have been divided into the following sections. Next slide, please. So the findings that we will present are divided into defining circularity, measuring circularity, and the barriers identified for the implementation and the assessment of product circularity. Next slide, please. Moving on to the findings related to measuring circularity, interviewees were specifically, in terms of defining circularity, we found that the understanding of how to implement and what this entails is fragmented. The understanding of the concept of circular economy also varies on the type of product and industry. And at a product level, the most common focus areas are on increasing the use of recycled content and bio-based materials, as well as designing for disassembly. For the interviewees with a basic and intermediate product circularity awareness level, circularity appeared to be mainly used to refer to the use of recycled materials. For the more advanced companies, we identified that these has started to move beyond the focus on recycling as a means towards circularity by including concepts such as material sustainability initiatives, circularity initiatives, and appear to be assigning a hierarchy to the circularity strategies. We found that few companies interviewed appeared to use the term eco-design, and where eco-design was recognized, product circularity aspects were considered separate to eco-designs. The interviews also revealed the emergence of new concepts and terminologies such as circular by design and circular ready design. Next slide, please. In terms of the product circularity strategies being considered, implemented, and measured within industry, we found that primarily to increase the use of recycled materials to replace virgin materials and increase the use of renewable materials were the most common strategies or goals. So in the first column, the first column related to product circularity strategy goals, we can see that 18 from the 21 interviewees had these within their strategies, and then in terms of the implementation, if we could go back. And then in terms of implementation, 16 of the interviewed companies were already implementing this as a product circularity strategies. Now, in terms of measuring product circularity in a quantitative assessment, only 6 of the companies highlighted that they had metrics and indicators to assess the circularity of their products by increasing the use of recycled materials to replace the use of virgin materials. Next slide, please. And then in this table, we have various design improvements and product circularity strategies, and then we can see how for example, reducing the number of parts decreases to 11 of the companies, highlighting that these were within their strategy goals. And in terms of implementation, so in terms of implementation, 11, but then 0 in terms of measuring this product circularity strategy. Next slide, please. And then when we move to the use phase, this table shows how, for example, maximizing the ease of reuse or disassembly, it was within 15 of the interviewees' strategy or goals, but then in terms of implementation, only 6 were currently implementing, and only 1 had developed a mechanism to measure the product's circularity at a product level, specifically for this strategy. So moving on to the findings related to measuring circularity. For this section, interviewees were specifically asked if they measured circularity, and this was followed by asking participants to indicate if they had used, or were aware of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's MCI and the WBCSD's CTI tool. So from the 21 companies interviewed, only 2 claimed to measure circularity using external frameworks. Then from the 19 companies that do not measure circularity using either the EMF's MCI or the CTI tool, 6 companies stated that they do measure product circularity, however, using internal frameworks. And this includes developing internal product-specific tools or assessing aspects of product circularity within standard LCAs or qualitative checklists. Now, the challenges identified in terms of using either the MCI or the CTI was the use of a single score system and the way in which the system boundaries are defined. 7 interviewees also indicated that they're exploring the possibility of measuring circularity beyond the recycled inflows and outflows and to focus more on the use phase. So the main challenges highlighted within this section was the extensive number of frameworks, tools and methodologies available that often provide limited guidance for the users about the benefits over one over the other. Next slide, please. Lastly, the interviews also highlighted that one of the main barriers for implementing and measuring product circularity is the siloed nature of communication across business functions, as it was identified that these connections depend largely on the culture and individual company policies, as the following quote shows. Next slide, please. So in this context, the findings from these 21 interviews and as part of Orienting project, we developed an entry-level product circularity guidance for users to enable them to begin their circularity journey. Now, this guidance consists of 5 steps or phases, and then we developed 3 forms to be completed by the relevant stakeholders. The overall aims of this process are to enable cross-communication across different business functions, to gain a common understanding of product circularity, and identify the most feasible product circularity strategies for the selected product, and begin to identify and collect the data required for a quantitative circularity assessment. Now, this entry-level product circularity guidance was then used as a basis to develop a further entry-level guidance for the full LCSA domains, so including an entry level for the environmental, the social, the economic, and the criticality assessments within orienting. And this work, this entry level guidance will be available through the handbook and the tool that will be made publicly available through Orienting's website later this year. Next slide, please. To summarize the findings from the interviews, we identified that it is important to promote a multi-level approach within product circularity assessments. The methodology and tool development needs to offer guidance for adapting product circularity measurements and indicators to meet industry-specific requirements. Also, there is a need to address the issue around accessing user data whilst also complying with data privacy. And product circularity assessments, methodologies, and tools need to address how to effectively bring stakeholders together to highlight where to locate relevant data and effectively communicate the results across business functions. So I have added the Orienting website here where you'll be able to find project methodology, the reports, the handbooks, and the tools as well. So lastly, before we open the floor for discussion, we will briefly introduce a further project that builds on the development of the entry-level product circularity guidance and the findings from the interviews. So as mentioned previously, these interviews highlighted that the product circularity indicators and metrics are not industry specific enough and therefore fail to address product specific value chains and requirements. So in this sense, we're currently developing a product circularity app specifically for the fashion and clothing sector to align this with the interest gained within policy to address the unregulated nature of the sector. Now, this tool aims to support users within the industry to identify individual and organizational circularity maturity levels, identify the most relevant product circularity strategies for their product and the associated sustainability trade-offs. So, for example, the trade-offs against the environmental, economic, and social aspects. And it's work in progress, but we're currently developing this with input from experts within the industry through online research, pilots, focus groups, and workshops. And we aim to make this publicly available in July this year. So we'll circulate the link to the app for anyone that's interested. Then next slide. And yeah, so happy to answer any questions. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, Martin and I.
Does anybody have any observations or questions or thoughts? Stunned silence.
I think there's a raised hand. Sonia.
Sonia, I can't see that on my. Just far ahead, Sonia.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for the presentation. Did I catch it right that the report is not available yet, but will be available soon? I could not find it on the website you've shown.
Yeah, so we're currently finalizing all the details within Orienting, and these will be made publicly available during the summer this year.
Okay. And second question, I could not really understand how the how you integrate the circularity check, or however you name it, with the LCA. I thought from your from a graphic you've showed that you try to integrate LCA, LCC, criticality together, and I did not get how you did that.
Yes, exactly. So I can go ahead unless Martin wants
Yeah,
to.
maybe go ahead and then I'll
Okay.
I may add.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so the initial proposal was to integrate the circularity indicators and metrics, but then as the project progressed, both circularity and criticality are optional, and they will not be integrated within the LCSA assessment. So this assessment is conducted in parallel, and it serves to compare the trade-offs, but it will not conduce to a integrated indicator.
Ah, that's a
Yeah.
pity. I
Yeah.
think we all miss.
I think
Yeah.
it's
I
the
mean,
complication, the complexity of
it's highly
integration. Yeah.
complex, and even doing the basic sort of alignment of life cycle costing, social LCA, and environmental LCA. What we've designed, however, is the product circularity approach and as a standalone methodology that can be used, and we have trialed it on some products, and it's been useful. So when the report is signed off by the commission project officer, it's all written. We're just awaiting the sign off there. It will be made publicly available. And again, yeah, the approach can be applied directly without, let's say, can be approached directly.
Okay, okay, thank you for the explanation.
Okay. Anybody else got any questions or raised hands? I can't see. There's something in the chat. It has been mentioned. Hi, Jose Luis. It has been mentioned that companies do not know which tool to use because there are too many and the benefits of these tools are not explained. Is that a problem of information, lack of information of each tool, or lack of comparative assessment of tools? Maybe I'll have a crack at this first, Lillian.
Mhm.
Um, I, you know, I think there's particularly once you get down to the level of SMEs and micro SMEs, there's just, a confusion over the proliferation of tools out there and which ones are most appropriate. So it's in a sense over information. What we found when we drilled into the product circularity measurement side, and particularly looking at the alignment to LCA, is that even those very limited tools really didn't take account of the full life cycle stages. They were restricted to uh, cradle to what is it, cradle to factory, whatever it's called, not the full cradle from extraction through to use and post use. So there were limitations we found in the existing tools. What we also found was some of the challenges that industry is moving ahead with use of tools, for example, the CTI tool within WBCSD, and the colleagues who reviewed the tools, focusing on what was published in the literature, had entirely missed the CTI tool that was being actually used by a range of companies, a significant range of companies. So I think it's partially that perhaps the tools aren't necessarily entirely appropriate. Perhaps, despite think tank discussions and high level discussions, the actual focus on product circularity is much more limited, as Lillian had mentioned, to the incorporation of recycled materials or bio-based materials. So full circularity, closed loop systems integrating repair, reuse, remanufacturing are very limited at the moment. And that's partially also because a lot of the use phase data is actually not owned by the manufacturers. One of my basic learnings from this is from a life cycles perspective, what you see is still a lot of companies selling their products into the chain, either retailer or online, and actually really don't know often how the products are used, and they don't collect the data there. So I think it's a range of issues in response to your question. Do you have any further comment on that, Lillian?
I, I would also say that yeah, so there are too many tools out there, but then also they're not very product specific. So again, they don't work at an individual level. And then also product circularity is driven either by regulation, legislation, or consumer demand. And companies are finding it challenging to know which assessments will be required within these regulations, for example. So I think it's perhaps a lack of consensus on which assessment to use as well.
So building on that, a lot of companies are still trying to work through, how to manage this. And we found some quite surprising findings. As somebody who's been involved in eco design since the mid-90s and involved in a lot of activities there were a number of the companies that were interviewed who were already on the circularity journey. We knew had applied eco design, and even some of them were leaders in eco design. When we did the interviews, we found that a lot of those interviewees were not aware of the term eco design. They weren't aware of it being practiced. So there was some sort of slightly odd findings there. We also found that a lot of companies were almost separately setting up circularity teams or approaches that did have a dotted line relationship into sort of sustainability or ESG teams, but they were somehow a bit separate. So we had the feeling that a number of companies were still sort of working through how they were going to manage circularity at a business level, process level, and particularly at a product level. Do you see a contradiction in the need for industry product-specific circularity tools versus generic LCA methodology? So I have to read that again. Do you see a contradiction in the need for industry product-specific circularity tools versus generic LCA? I personally don't see a contradiction there. I mean, what you have is, for example, ISO, standards around, LCA in its various forms, the ISO 1440 series. Inevitably, there are different sets of issues that align to different product markets. And there are different aspects of the life cycle or different sort of elements of the life cycle or different aspects, dependent on whether you're using an energy using product or a product that's more materials based. So I don't see there is a contradiction. I think, the I think to enable companies to more effectively use a number of these tools and methodologies, the more they are adaptable and can be aligned to the needs of a specific product and product and industry sector, the more likely it is to be easy to be used, if that makes sense. And if it doesn't, please, I think it's Ingrid, shout. Okay, yes, thanks. Okay. Um, so again, what we found, and is in parallel to the ISO experience that at least one person on the call has been engaged in, is there's still a very there's still a lack of consensus within companies around what circular economy actually means, and then what product circularity means. There will, at least as per the statement of the convener of TC323, the ISO standard, or ISO technical committee, is the first three standards will be delivered and published in May, and that's on terminology, that's on value chains and business models, and on measurement of circularity. And bearing in mind Lillian's presentation and our findings and some of the questions, still the main emphasis of the measurement of circularity standard is more at a sort of organizational and process level. It does touch on product to some extent, but the emphasis is at those sort of process, management sort of levels. But I think another driver may be to increase interest and sort of concerns around this area is the now, I believe, passing of the Eco Design for Sustainable Products regulations yesterday or the day before. So this will mean issues of circularity, becoming more important in regulations, across a broader range of sectors. And I'd say one point that neither of us has mentioned before, and this is part of the challenge on a standard side, there is such a wide range of activity happening, it's difficult to keep track of it. Within the SEN materials efficiency standards, a new working group was launched perhaps 18 to 24 months ago on circular design. And that is also coming up for publication this year as well. So there's a lot of things happening that are not necessarily always joined up. Any questions? Anybody physically want to ask a question? Anybody want to post another question in the chat? Are any of those on the call, looking to integrate circularity into their design and development process? And, are you finding challenges with the tool available, with the expertise available? Any comments on that? So I think for everybody's time that we've got a question pop up again from Jose Luis. Do you want to take this one, Lillian? Or I do. Do you think that that part of the reason why circular tools are not implemented is because they do not explain the cost benefits of these tools? So I'd say the limited number of more detailed tools are more linked to more linked to life cycle, and that's where they come from. They don't really, from what we've seen, they really don't do that sort of cost benefit analysis or do the trade-off analysis, which I think is also an important point. And is slightly what I could see challenge into the future is we already have two standards on eco-design, one on how you integrate more broadly environmental issues into design and development, and a second one, how you include that into EMS. But we've now got a new standard that will be launched, the SEN standard on circular design that's specifically focused on circularity. And again, one needs to be aware of those broader trade-offs in terms of energy use, water use, whatever it is. So I haven't, it's not quite clear how these different standards and the tools related will be aligned. Again, just a key point that I mentioned in terms of the challenges of what's going on at the moment, that SEN standard was originally started off by being written for the energy using products sector in relation to the existing eco-design directive. But now the challenge there is that the Commission is requiring that standard to be rewritten to cover all products, all sectors, particularly for sectors like the textiles and clothing sector being brought into the focus of policymaking. Sorry, Lillian, over to you.
Yes, I was going to add, and I think Ingrid has already responded slightly towards my comment, but I was also going to say that the majority of the circularity tools out there still focus at an organizational level. So while some of the tools do include an economic potential, it's still at an organizational level. For example, the WBCSD's CTI does include circular revenue, but it's still not as specific as at a product level. It's more at a overall organizational revenue.
Yeah, so I'd just like to reinforce that. If there are other tools that you are aware of that are looking explicitly at the sort of cost benefit and economic aspects of product circularity, we would to love to hear about it. Just going back to a couple of questions above, um, sorry, my screen has jumped here. I'm looking at the relationship between circular design and regenerative design. Could you comment on how these two relate, please? Well, we just ran a physical workshop on exactly that in the World Circular Economy Forum last week, and we are going to be running a webinar based on the learnings for that on the 16th of May. So whoever iPhone S is, watch out for another email that will be coming soon. Circular design, as a sort of physical concept is maturing, for example, through the development of this standard. Regenerative design is a much newer concept, and the application of it at a product level is much newer and much more immature. There's also similarly definitional issues. There's regenerative agriculture. There's also regenerative used in terms of, personal development, regenerating organizations, for example. But in terms of the application of what regenerative means within design and development, is a much newer issue. So we will be going in more detail into that area on another webinar on the 16th of May. And indeed, we have a colleague and PhD who is focusing on exactly those issues within the in relation to the laptop and electronics sector and the solar module sector. So he will be presenting his thinking at that webinar. And some of what it might mean is things like self-healing products, smart products, but we'll be going into this in a lot more detail at that event. So there's a comment there about a strategic innovation module that somebody is introducing there at a course. So it looks like it's all thanks there. So, okay, unless there's any other further comments, we will redistribute the webinar, and hopefully that 3 or 4 minutes where Lillian sounds as if she was underwater. Yeah, yeah. The slides will help clarify that. And again, if anybody has any sort of short, sharp questions or comments after, we'll be happy to sort of tackle that. And indeed, we are just awaiting, the final agreement from the project officer within orienting, and immediately that's agreed, we will upload the report and communicate that to the attendees. So hopefully you found it useful, as at least I would say, at least I always think hopefully you got at least one thing out of it today, one thing you agreed with, disagreed with, a new perspective, or something that made you think. So I'd like to thank Lillian for her work on this. And thank you all very much for your presence. And maybe we will see you on the 16th. So have a good rest of the afternoon,
Thank you,
or
everyone.
wherever you are in the world, where you're whatever. Okay,
Thank you.
bye.
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 Bye.